Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Grappling with podcast. Dr. Chris Hardy and William Walker will take a deep dive into topics covering wellness and prevention, performance, recovery, and injury management. Our mission is to provide the latest science-based information to help you get the most out of your grappling journey, both on and off the mats, and help you overcome any challenges you may be grappling with. Dr. Hardy is a licensed physician and BJJ practitioner, but the contents of the podcast are meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. Please seek out personalized care from your own medical provider prior to implementing any medical treatment or intervention.
Oh, hello, Bill. We are back.
Yes, we are.
Excellent. What's going on with you? Anything cool?
You know what? I'm upset about a burrito incident last night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It got ugly. If I could be so bold.
Yes.
But I'd like you to stay out of my personal life. So. How you doing?
I care about your burritos, man. I'm doing good.
I know you do.
I'm doing good. I'm actually fairly well rested today.
Okay.
So, that always helps. So
Yeah.
I might not take a nap in the middle of the podcast this time.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that happens when you get older.
It does, man. So we have a pretty cool topic today. It's something I'm really passionate about, vitamin D.
I mean, there's a lot of jokes I could throw out right there.
There's a
but
ton.
You're a Navy guy.
Yeah, that's right.
We knew we learned them on Monday.
I'm not even going to ask you to expound upon it, honestly.
Well, I keep using words like that, and I'll expound upon your booty.
Really, Bill?
Well, you know what?
Okay.
We can do that in class tonight.
I had a Red Bull earlier.
I like it. Well, at least it wasn't methamphetamine this time. So before we get started, I want to advertise a book
Okay.
written by, I don't know, where should I hold this, Olivia?
You can hold it.
Block your face for
Block
this
my
one.
face.
Or that, yeah. We can do
Is that cool?
Yep, that works.
So it's called The Spotted Owl by our friend Kyle Hiller. One of the coolest people I know, and more importantly, a fellow over 50 brown belt. Former Marine special operations type.
Yeah.
I mean, and,
Still wearing the high and tight like a savage.
and my own, and you guys have probably shot with him before. Really good firearms instructor, and a hell of a writer.
Mm-hmm.
This is super cool. We always think, oh, a friend writes a book, oh, we'll buy it, right?
Yeah.
It's actually very good.
Right.
So
It's available, right?
it is on Amazon right now, and it's really kind of I was a big fan of the X-Files, in the 90s, and it's kind of a mixture of that and what Kyle likes to say is a mixture of that and Rambo.
Sold.
I mean, that's what I said too. But then, when I'm reading it, it has a lot of stuff with the Northwest too that I think people that live up here will really appreciate. But even if you don't, it's still super cool. So highly recommended.
awesome.
I wanted to kind of just give that a little shout out here before we get
For
started.
sure. Like and subscribe, Kyle. I haven't seen it yet.
That's right. If we're going to advertise your book, you
Yeah.
better subscribe to our podcast.
Do something.
All right.
But yeah, so vitamin D.
Yes, sir. So people always, lump that in with vitamins, C and E and all that. And did you know it's not really a vitamin?
I've heard this somewhere recently.
Probably from me.
Maybe.
Okay.
I think I read it in a book. But
Yeah.
it might have been your book.
Oh, I didn't say it.
Did you read his book, Bill?
Okay,
you
if
read
I
it?
could be bold, since we're talking about books.
Yeah.
I haven't really read a book since I think it was called The Giver in elementary school, right?
Yeah.
Is that when we
was
had to read that?
definitely Lois Lowry.
Yep.
Okay.
And
that's
Mike
really
Lowry.
right. No, that's not right.
And I read probably a couple chapters of that book. And then I lied and said I read the whole thing. That's the closest I've come to reading a book in the last.
Well, I will tell you this. Andrew Solheim has said that he had a similar experience. I don't know that, but he's and he read Kyle's book and it's like, this is amazing.
He blew through it pretty quick.
Yeah,
too.
he did. So,
And we know he has that learning disability stuff going on. So it's like, it's probably a pretty good read.
you're going to pay. Andrew's going to make you pay for that one. Anyway, yeah, you're a bold man. So back to vitamin D. Yes.
Yeah, so it's not a vitamin.
Yeah, and so it really is a hormone. And it's really important because vitamins typically, they're required in our diet. They help things work better. There's different processes with biochemistry and physiology that they kind of assist with. They're called like cofactors and things like that, where hormones actually go in and stimulate the nucleus of cells to actually do something. In other words, they kind of stimulate gene expression. So they regulate things on the DNA level, like tells the cell to produce protein or whatever.
This is hormones.
Hormones. Gives it directions to do something through some mechanisms. So vitamin D, when it was originally discovered, because it is necessary for preventing a childhood illness called rickets. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it on Tom Sawyer, I think.
Yeah, right, back in the day there. And the kind of the adult version, osteomalacia. It's like softening of the bones, right?
Sure.
And so it was kind of named a vitamin because of that action, but we found since then it really is a hormone.
So I don't understand. These two diseases exist.
Yeah.
And something that they found that helped people with it is vitamin D. So
prevent it, yes.
Okay, so they were like, well, let's call it a vitamin.
Yeah, because just like scurvy and vitamin C, right?
Sure.
So it's the same type of idea, but we found out later studying as time went on of all its mechanisms, and we're going to kind of go into that.
Isn't scurvy where you drink your own urine? Serious. Like, don't you get scurvy from drinking your own urine?
Well, you get scurvy from inadequate vitamin C. It's what happened on the voyages across the Atlantic, where that's why they called British sailors limeys. You ever heard that before?
No, I wasn't around then.
But you haven't heard that reference.
Limeys?
They call them limeys. Scurvy is when you have lack of vitamin C, you get weakening of collagen. You don't form collagen. People's teeth used to fall out.
Okay.
Gums are bleeding, things like that. So they found if they put limes in the water, they wouldn't get it. On these crossing the Atlantic on these long voyages.
Okay.
And ships had sails
Nothing with
and
urine.
stuff like that. I'm aware of. That's kind of an odd reference. I don't.
Okay.
That's a good one though. Hey, Libby, if you can find that's something to do with urine and that's
Scurvy.
I would learn something new today.
Okay.
So anyway, now that we know it's a steroid, it's kind of
Okay, you throw in steroid. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, it's a steroid hormone. I'm sorry, I got ahead of us here. So when we talk about steroids, there's like cortisol is a steroid,
Okay.
testosterone, estrogen. They all have a precursor. Steroid just describes a type of chemical structure.
Okay.
But people think of steroids as something you take to make you huge.
Yeah, blast off.
So they all have the same chemical structure with little different attachments to them that make them different hormones. Mm-hmm. But the precursor to almost all of those things is cholesterol. And if you look at the word cholesterol, sterol at the end, the sterol is the backbone of steroid molecules.
Okay.
So vitamin D happens to be derived from cholesterol. And so it goes back when we talk about cholesterol and whenever we end up doing that podcast of how important it is, this is one of the things that shows how important cholesterol is in general. So cholesterol is a precursor to a bunch of stuff, most of our hormones and also vitamin D. And how it works with vitamin D is you have a cholesterol, a modified cholesterol is then hit by UVB, ultraviolet light.
Okay. The sun.
And it cleaves it, and it forms vitamin D.
Cleaves it like you get.
Yeah, it actually the UV light actually is called ionizing radiation. It actually can alter the chemical structure of it in the skin. And it's interesting because that's not the active form. That is the form called D3 or cholecalciferol. You don't need to know the chemical name. But that's the stuff that you buy over the counter. When I was like, hey, I want to take vitamin D, they say D3.
Yeah,
You've probably
seen
seen
the
D3.
Yeah.
That's called cholecalciferol. That's the thing that's made directly by the UVB light
So
from the sun.
if I'm going to get some vitamin D supplements, would it be better to get the one that says D3 on there? Okay.
Yeah, and most of them are at this point. Yeah, that's a good question. Then it goes to the liver, and then it's modified further, and it has one more step where it goes to the kidney, modified again, and that's the active form that actually has all the actions in the body. So just to kind of give you guys an example of that's how it's formed. And especially in the Northwest, you can see why we have a problem with...
we're very deficient.
Probably, most of us are. So another thing to think about with vitamin D when we're supplementing it is it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So in other words, it is absorbed better taken with fat.
As in nutrition-wise. Okay.
And so if you're going to do dietarily, right? So that's why you see them in little round little capsules that are oil-filled.
Like my Advil.
Yeah. So, but they're little amber colored vitamin D supplements. Most of them have some type of oil, which is a fat, to help them absorb better. So just keep that in mind.
It's not that you have to take it with a fat. It's just if you want the most absorption.
Yes.
It's smart to do it when.
Correct.
What are some fats? Like, throw a couple out there.
I mean, anything. I mean, just with any food, like, steak has fat in it.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be like
avocados have fat.
Avocado. Like,
olive oil.
Fat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stuff like that. Some butter.
Okay.
Right. That's a good question.
I'll take down a stick of butter like it's nobody's business.
Right. So just shove a couple of vitamin Ds in there and you're good to go.
Take note, honey.
I do want to say, which this is just somebody's paper that I found online.
Yeah.
But there was a mention of during those voyages, across the, what is that, the Atlantic?
Yep.
That there was a captain, a Portuguese explorer, who, in an odd attempt to cure his men, ordered them to wash their mouths with their own urine, and it proved to be unpalatable and ineffective. So, Bill.
So your little urine experiment.
So does that mean I'm right or I'm wrong?
That would be misinformation.
Dare you, sir? So I'm kind of right.
If
It's a little too much silence going on when I say
no,
that.
I don't. I'm trying not to let you down hard.
Okay.
I'm just trying to let the thing just die down. And hopefully you'll drop it.
Let me tell you something. I've been balding since I was 25. You can let me down as hard as you want.
So I'm not aware of any urine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, honey.
You're welcome.
Good job, Olivia, for backing me up with facts. So
You are science.
yes, I am science. Do not question me.
They figured that out in 1497, Bill.
All right.
It was worth a shot, though, right?
Yeah.
So what we were talking about, like in the Northwest, many of us are deficient. And there's been estimates across the United States as 40% of the population's deficient. And what's interesting is it depends on what cutoff they use to say what's deficient and what's not. And we're going to talk about that later. Because if you use the cutoffs that more recent science shows, I guarantee you more than 40% are deficient. So they're using what's called 20 nanograms per milliliter. It's a blood, that's the level in the blood. Under that's considered deficient. And I would say that's an antiquated idea. But even with that number, 40% of people are deficient. That's crazy.
I think where I heard some of these terms with vitamin D was from Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Yes.
When she's been on Joe Rogan and that sort of thing. And
Yep.
if I remember right, she was saying the exact same thing, which was there's old vitamin D data that people go off of, but it's quite obvious now that.
Well, I'll tell you why we're going to go into why that happened in the first place and why it makes why it made sense then and it's outdated now. But getting onto the deficiency, increased risk if you have darker skin, which makes sense. I mean, melanin in the skin, if you think, especially people that live near the equator, have lots more sun, they need more protection against the UVB light. Okay, UV light is great for producing vitamin D. Too much of it obviously can cause damage and, cancers and things like that. So that is an adaptation to prevent that, but still get adequate vitamin D. But when you take a person with darker skin and you move them away from sunshine, they're even less able to get D from the sun.
I always thought when I was younger, mind you, I know this isn't true, I'm pretty 70% sure, is I always thought as the sun made it so if you were darker, you absorb sun better. And that's why you are darker.
So melanin changes.
I thought vitamin D and melanin were the same thing.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
No, I got what you're saying. But you absolutely, that's an adaptation, because if you go out in the sun right now, if you don't burn over time, your skin will get darker. It's an adaptation for protection, because the body's like, hey, this guy's getting more, so we're trying.
Olivia was tanned up when we lived in Arizona.
Right.
Tanned up.
And then you move up here, and that kind of goes away, right? It's part of just the environmental stimulus and the reaction to it. But people with darker skin, more melanin, won't produce as much vitamin D, especially if they're up in northern latitudes, and they're much more at risk for being deficient. And so that's something to really take in. That's a whole nother reason this whole one-size-fits-all recommendations don't work, because there's some just, melanin, although it's protective against sun, it makes people more difficult to get their vitamin D levels adequate. And we'll talk more about that later too, because that's a really important point.
Does that mean then that as somebody like me or you or Bill get tanner and tanner throughout the summer, that it becomes harder for our bodies to absorb the vitamin D?
It's a regulatory mechanism.
So even though we're getting tanned up, we're potentially becoming more deficient.
No, because as you're getting tan, you're making vitamin D.
Okay.
So it's there. All the processes happen at the same time. It's almost like having a pump that's always on, and when water fills up, not always on, but when water comes, like a sump pump, when it starts flooding, then it turns on and drains. Right. The same idea. You're making vitamin D, but as you get more and more exposed, you're getting that more protection. It's kind of a feedback mechanism. Most people have higher vitamin D levels in the summertime. But, and aside from just people with darker skin, also obese and diabetics also have deficient vitamin D. And it's part of in other words, as a physician, when I'm looking at someone for preventive, risk factors and things like that, the first thing I'll do, especially if they have darker skin, obese, diabetic, I'll definitely get a vitamin D level on them for sure. Because the consequences of not.
When you say obese, I think a 600-pound life. Are we talking less than that? Like
it
a lot
depends
less?
It depends on the person.
But I mean something that to consider your vitamin
or
D
even
levels.
overweight.
Okay.
Yeah, I would absolutely get a vitamin D because getting that level up to good level can have really profound effects on their health from a preventative standpoint. We'll talk about that some more too. It's really important. So also sunscreen, people working indoors, right?
Yeah, because when we go out, we almost always put on sunscreen.
Right. Well, and the dermatologists have done a fantastic job of scaring everyone to death, saying that basically no sun exposure is optimum.
Right.
I'm not putting the bottom line, and there's a happy medium there. Yeah, it's important not to get burned and prevent skin cancer, but it's also really important to get your vitamin D levels too. So that's had that's always those extremes, right? You want to find some middle ground there with this, especially. So, then it begs the question, well, if you're going to supplement this, how much you do and what levels, like we were talking about, what levels are good. So it turns out when they first established, like Rhonda Patrick correctly said, she's a great resource for a bunch of this stuff too. You should check out her podcast. But the levels were initially set at 20 nanograms per milliliter. That's the blood test. When you test your blood, they'll come back, and if you're over that, typically that's considered adequate. They did that because that is the minimum amount you need to prevent rickets and osteomalacia, the bone issues. Because vitamin D, one of its primary functions is to absorb calcium from the diet into the bloodstream to allow for all the things that happen with bones, calcium deposition and all that. So those initial values were set just to prevent that one thing,
right? Let alone all the other stuff that
but
we
didn't know about all that other stuff,
Gotcha.
right? But we're still carrying forward those recommendations to today, even though that we found that the other things vitamin D does potentially, and we're finding much more support of this now, needs definitely higher levels to be optimum. So that's why the Institute of Medicine and the Endocrine Society are the ones that said that over 20 nanograms per milliliter is sufficient. Yeah, maybe for preventing rickets and osteomalacia, but that's about it. And so that's a very important point, because we're going to go more into that. So we mentioned that it was a hormone. It regulates about 5% of our entire genome. So in other words, it's involved with a bunch of things.
I don't even understand what a genome is.
Our genome is our entire coding sequence of DNA. Everything, like for everything, there's a gene for every protein that does things, eye color, hair, the whole 9 yards, what makes you you. We have thousands and thousands of those things for various purposes. And vitamin D actually has a regulatory effect. In other words, can turn on or off a full 5% of our entire genome. Okay. So that's pretty profound. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So we already talked about how it regulates calcium in the gut, so you can absorb it. And it also regulates immune function. And we're going to go big into that here in a minute, because it's been very relevant in the past 2 years.
So is it more valuable, or does it have bigger effects on the immune stuff than almost anything else?
Nope.
Okay.
It affects everything. However, at the levels that were said to be quote unquote 20, sufficient, it's suboptimum for immune system regulation.
Got it.
And that's the important point. For us directly, skeletal muscle regeneration, really important, like a recovery thing from training or from injury even. And mitochondrial health. Mitochondria are the so-called powerhouses in the cell that produce energy. Okay. So vitamin D is really important for that too. So this is some interesting research on muscle regeneration. So increased vitamin D levels showed faster recovery in strength after hard training sessions. So they've done studies where if your levels are optimum, you'll recover faster from your strength training. Your muscle will rebuild, because strength training in Jiu Jitsu, whatever you're doing, breaks down muscle, damages it. And they've shown that you can return to your baseline strength. Remember we were talking about testing grip and stuff like that, and different, and
seeing where your nervous system is.
Nervous system, and also the muscular system in general will recover faster if your D levels are adequate. And so for a performance perspective and a recovery perspective, it's really important that we pay attention to this.
So when we're looking at our supplements, and I've heard other podcasts talk about this, is that it's in IUs. That's like we take, I think, 8,000 IUs a day.
Yeah.
How does that relate to?
We'll talk.
Okay.
So IUs has a microgram conversion, not milligram. Okay. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Most of the time when we talk about vitamin D dosage, we'll talk about it in IUs. Micrograms are used, usually in scientific papers.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a really good question.
So, but we'll get there on like appropriate amounts to at least start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so back to the muscle regeneration, we have stem cells around the muscles You know what stem cells are? You're familiar with
I've
them?
only heard of them that they help fix you up.
Yeah, so stem cells are cells that haven't decided what they fully want to be yet. So if you look at when you have an embryo growing, embryo will start dividing, and then we'll start differentiating to different types of cells. Like some will become muscle, some will become bone, some will become nervous system, some heart. You get the idea. Okay. But those original cells are what we call pluripotent stem cells. And what that means is they can become anything. Okay. Along that, when they differentiate and they go down a certain pathway, so let's say they go down like, okay, we're going to become a musculoskeletal thing. Okay, but are you going to become cartilage? Are you going to become bone? Are you going to become muscle? Mm-hmm. That's a pathway called the mesenchymal stem cells. You don't need to know all this, but the bottom line, that's a type of stem cell that then can become various aspects of the musculoskeletal system. Satellite cells are one of those type of cells that line the muscles, and when muscles need to regenerate, they will actually differentiate into muscle and actually combine and fuse with the existing muscles. Muscle cells. Muscle cells are very interesting is because many cells just have one nucleus in them. Muscle cells have multiple nuclei. They're really interesting cells.
If you say nucleus, you have to say nucleus.
Nucleus. Is that pretty good?
Nacho Libre.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Yes. So
okay,
vitamin D increases the division of these satellite cells, and that's how it helps regenerate. So if you don't have adequate vitamin D levels, you're not getting as good of activation of these type of satellite cells, they're called, which are a type of stem cell. So that's just how, I'm just showing the importance of this having optimum levels for a variety of things. I'm just kind of giving examples right now.
I had a random question,
Yeah.
a little off, so you got notes, so whenever I distract you can come
No,
right back.
we're good. I'm fine.
Do we have that guy, our friend at the gym, ask about stem cells or PRP?
PRP.
Is there a difference?
Big time.
Can either of them help with bone breaks?
I'd have to look at the literature. Stem cells probably, PRP technically could. I haven't looked at the studies on them.
Okay.
Stem cells are actually injecting cells. PRP is platelet-rich plasma, They stimulate, basically it kind of jumpstart the healing mechanisms. You basically...
So it's not just soft tissue like that you would use that for?
No, you could use it for anything involved with the healing process. But I couldn't quote studies as showing that it's helped or not helped.
Sure.
With that.
That'd be maybe a cool episode in the future.
Well, my wife also does PRP.
Right.
And she does exosomes and all that kind of cool stuff. So she could give you a whole talk about that's called regenerative medicine. So she could give you a whole talk about that.
Yeah, I remember because I had that shoulder thing that we were going to progress to anymore.
Exactly. And we, I got exosomes when I ripped my adductor muscle this last summer.
Yeah.
Right. I was back on the mats in 8 weeks.
Crazy fast.
Yeah. And I'm old. So
damn old.
I'm super old. As you said. As you said in the video that you've just narrated, which was fantastic, by the way.
You were passing out. You were literally fainting on screen.
Have you ever seen a possum?
I've seen those ugly bastards.
You know what they do? When they're attacked, they literally pass out.
True.
So I was using that technique, and then I came back all of a sudden and did a butterfly sweep.
Okay.
So, like you said...
Have you ever seen 600 Pound Life?
No.
Not a single episode?
Not a single episode.
You're a liar, too?
No, I've never seen it, honestly.
Oh, gosh. You don't know nothing. So what happens is they have to walk up probably 3 steps.
Okay.
And then they get tired. Mm-hmm. And then they want to collapse. Mm-hmm. You're not the possum. You're 600 Pound Life.
You're not going to take into account the 6 rolls I did before then?
Rolling with the kids class or something? Jeez. Give Gian some credit.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah,
I got to give him full... No, I got to give him full credit. He's excellent.
Back to your notes.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel ashamed now.
Hey, I mean, everyone passes out.
Right in the middle of the roll. It was a sweet sweep, though.
Yeah. Well.
So, anyway, we've looked into these muscle, damaged muscle after, lifting or injury. And what's interesting is we got some clues to how vitamin D would affect it because it was expressing increased vitamin D receptors. So any hormone or any circulating has to dock with a receptor, and then it initiates a cascade of events which enhances gene expression, the whole 9 yards. To get them into the cell, the receptors have to pop up on the cell surface to catch them, kind of, if you think about it. So when something needs vitamin D, more receptors pop up. And that's what they observed in these damaged muscle cells. They're like, there's probably something going on there with vitamin D, so that's how they looked into it further. So just kind of how we look at things in science, you see something that's interesting and you kind of follow that chain. And so that's kind of how we looked at that.
Okay.
Now, we also talked about not only the muscle itself, but the mitochondria, which are those powerhouses inside all cells, but muscle. Well, I shouldn't say all cells. Red blood cells don't have them, but every other cell. So with muscle cells, the more mitochondrial density you have, the more energy production capability.
Could we relate that to like lean muscle?
Yeah. So we could relate it to, you see this all the time with runners, with what's called, they always say, oh yeah, they have slow twitch type 1 fibers.
Sure.
They typically have more mitochondria in there because they use more what's called aerobic metabolism. Remember when we talked about aerobic versus anaerobic, with oxygen, without? So the mitochondria function, especially during the Krebs cycle, for that to function, you need oxygen. So people that are high-level endurance athletes have a lot of mitochondrial density in their muscle cells. In other words, they got a lot of mitochondria. So, and that's not just endurance athletes too.
Right.
The more endurance, when you're doing endurance type work, you want more aerobic capacity, you tend to build more mitochondria. And what they found is normalizing vitamin D levels increases mitochondrial density. So you're basically improving your energy production. So if you're walking around training and you're, doing, let's say how many classes have you done this week? It's Thursday right now.
It's Thursday. 5.
Right. So especially someone like you trains frequently. If you're running around with inadequate vitamin D, I'm not saying you are, but if you were, you're basically rolling with, a proverbial hand tied behind your back.
So you said perverted.
Proverbial.
Oh, okay.
Well, with you, it might be a perverted hand doing something. I don't know. Hey, but it's you're just leaving money on the table basically. And if you can optimize that, you could do you could really enhance your mitochondrial density and get more energy production out of it.
Now my brain's trying to attach and replace. Maybe I'm not training and working out as much as I am, but I'm replacing that stress with another stress. So maybe I'm not working out a ton, but I just got some stress going on in life, right? So would vitamin D help in?
For other reasons. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
good question, but not for this one. So, but if you are imposing a demand on the musculoskeletal system.
Okay. This is specific to
that.
the muscle.
Yeah, for mitochondrial density. No, that's a great question though, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
I got to give you props when you actually, mess up and actually have a good question. So.
Okay. Felt a little underhanded there.
It was a little underhanded. So, also the next step from, muscle damage due to just regular training is a no kidding injury, right? So like I completely ripped my adductor muscle. You get a ton of vitamin D receptors expressed on that injured muscle. And so what happens then is, if you have adequate vitamin D, then you can have proper muscle repair and you'll recover faster. So that's another reason why it's really important to keep it in an optimum range.
I always talk about soreness. Vitamin D help us normal muscles.
That's a good question. I haven't looked at studies that looked at, because soreness is a symptom. We probably could find a study that looked at muscle soreness with that. I didn't see any in the research I've done so far, but it would make sense that if you're repairing the damage better,
But it's it could be just a small piece of that puzzle of helping with your soreness. There's a bunch of other things that are going to have more effect.
Yeah, and it all matters.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good question. So, that kind of, those are kind of the highlights on the musculoskeletal system. Now, something that I really am passionate about is the immune function. It's a huge regulator of the immune function. So there's different parts of the immune system. Okay, there's the innate system, the innate immune response, and people may know cells like called neutrophils, natural killer cells, macrophages, things like that. That is a non-specific response. So if it's basically, it'd be like someone coming into a neighborhood that you don't recognize. Your immune system's like, hey, that's not a normal
What
dude.
set you from, son?
Yeah, exactly. And they go and attack. As opposed to like a contract killer who has, hey, this one dude, specific person, is on my list. Okay, that's more of an adaptive, specific immune response.
Okay.
A non-specific is like, hey, anything that doesn't look right or it's quote unquote foreign to the immune system, that's where the innate system comes in and goes afterwards. Basically, it's really important for antiviral activity, viruses, and especially with respiratory viruses. So that one part of the immune system is like kind of the guards at the gate kind of thing, right?
Okay.
They're not, it's non-specific, but they're like, hey, there's something foreign here, let's get it.
Yeah.
Vitamin D is really important for increasing that activity.
So it just makes those soldiers stronger,
Yeah, it makes them
more effective,
and do their job better.
So a low vitamin D level can pretty much, if we're deficient up here, obviously we talked about that. People with more melanin in their skin, darker people, whatever, they are also naturally just deficient.
Right.
Especially if they're not in a really sunny environment.
Correct.
Arizona or something like that.
Right. And you just need to know who you are and
So
understand
with
this.
those things, you're going to be just naturally more vulnerable to any sort of Voldemort-style virus that...
Yeah, you stole my thunder. Thank you very much.
Did you have a setup for it?
Yeah, I had a setup for it.
How dare you, Bill?
I didn't think so.
You got to bleep that out, Olivia.
I'm gonna.
Thanks. I had a whole setup
You
for
were
it.
just vulnerable.
I'm completely ruined the episode.
Vulnerable to bowling.
Now I'm really upset.
Go on.
So that was the innate immune system, non-specific immune system. It also is really important with regulating what's called T regulatory cells. Regulating T regulatory, that's a bit of a mouthful. T regulatory cells are kind of the anti-war protesters of the immune system.
I think I just learned about those recently, that they kind of help to reduce like inflammation.
Yeah, so they're like, if you think about a bouncer in a bar, when something gets out of control, they're like, hey. Like,
They're not necessarily beating people up.
they're actually telling, like, they're stopping the immune system from getting overactive.
Okay.
So examples of overactivity of the immune system, autoimmune disease, like multiple sclerosis, many psoriasis, all these type of things, where the immune system is attacking. It's part of its own your body, so it's autoimmune. T regulatory cells are really important in preventing that. What's interesting is if you look at epidemiology, in other words, observational studies looking at regions of the world, there seems to be a higher incidence of like multiple sclerosis at higher latitudes, and a lot of people have made that leap and saying, hey, they also probably have low vitamin D status. It's why they're not having good T regulatory cells, and making them more prone to developing
The population can just almost have a regular autoimmune issue.
Yeah, obviously there's a genetic predisposition and all that, but it
becomes more popular.
Yeah, exactly. So that's vitamin D is really important with that. And you probably have heard about the cytokine storm, where the immune system goes nuts attacking something, and cytokines are basically a inflammatory messenger molecule in general. Some of them have anti-inflammatory properties, but we think about the inflammatory ones. They're the ones that, when they get out of control, they kill people in the hospital. Sepsis, stuff like that, where the inflammatory cascade goes crazy, and that's what actually is killing people.
Okay.
So T regulatory cells help prevent that over.
So when you're having some sort of sickness, then the cytokine storm happens, and that really just pushes them over the edge.
That is what really, then you go into organ failure, your lungs fill with fluid, that kind of thing.
Pneumonia, right?
Well, that's part of the process, right? So having good T regulatory cells, it's really important to prevent that type of carpet bombing, so to speak, right?
Vitamin D helps
increase the T regulatory cell population.
Oh. Interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Olivia.
So I think I had heard or read that, is it that your body only produces so many, no, hold on. It's like T-regs, and then there's like the T killer cells, but...
Natural killer cells, you're seeing of CD8 cells. Their immune system is really complicated. There's different types of T cells. There's B cells.
But once they're one type of T cell, they cannot change, correct? Like, so you have to try to get your body to produce more of a certain type of one, right? Like if you have too many killer cells, but not enough regulatory.
Well, that's the point. Yeah, exactly. So you can be imbalanced and not have a high T-reg population. And vitamin D is one of the factors that influences that the T-reg population.
And that's what can lead to things like autoimmune disease.
Yeah, if you have exactly. Because you have an out of control immune system that's not being reeled in, basically. Okay. It's really complex. It's actually fascinating, but that's the gist of it, basically.
Gotcha.
Now, you ever think about why, you think about cold and flu season, it's usually in the wintertime, okay? A lot of people now have seen such a strong correlation between respiratory infections and vitamin D levels that they're calling it basically low vitamin D season, right? So they're not as prevalent.
That's just because we know more about vitamin D now than
yeah. So that's why, it's always good to kind of get your levels checked in the summer and just get a baseline checked in the winter, because you may have to supplement differently. And we'll talk more about that. But so there's a lot of research showing that people with adequate vitamin D have less overall infections and less severe respiratory infections like influenza, RSV, and colds in general when they have adequate vitamin D. So that's something really interesting.
Should children be supplementing with
vitamin D? They should get checked, right? So that's a good question too, because they're humans like any of us.
Have you met some kids?
Well, you're right. There's some mutants out there.
Damn.
But
mutants?
I don't know. What were you going to say?
I don't know. I'm go there.
Well, if they weren't human, what were they? I love how he just
angels.
Put that. He just put that.
Angels.
I think you're full of it. I don't think that's what you're going to say. You make me look like the monster now.
You are the Grinch.
If the shoe fits, right? All right. So I'm going to pull up some recent research on, and you ruined my little analogy that I was going to make. This is really, I know we're joking about it. This is really important information. And with the current climate of censorship and suppression of information, of misinformation, I'm not going to use the virus that shall not be named. We're going to call it the Voldemort virus. Okay. And it's just because I think it's really important that we get some of this information out there. And I want to be very clear on this. I'm not talking about treatment of so-called Voldemort. I'm talking about a preventive strategy before.
Right.
Okay? So that's very different. So people are like, oh, it hasn't shown.
This is like more of like, this should just be something you're doing daily, whether it's for Voldemort or whether it's
flu,
whatever. Like this should just be part of your Flintstone vitamin pack.
This is just to show how important this is, especially with recent events. So there was a review and meta-analysis. And so we've talked about meta-analyses before, where what they are is they take a bunch of papers and pool the data together and analyze the data as an aggregate. So instead of just one study, they have multiple studies, and they take all of them, pool them together, and make sense of a generalized trend of all of them, right? So this was in July 2021 in the Journal of Steroid Biochemistry. And why was it in steroid biochemistry? Because it's vitamin D. It's a steroid hormone.
Aha.
Yes. So they took 43 of these studies, and these were all observational studies where they've watched things happen, basically. It's not a randomized controlled trial where like assigned groups and all that. They just watch something happen, a natural experiment. And out of those 43 studies, we're talking about over 600,000 people looking at this. So they had a very strong association with vitamin D deficiency was associated with worse severity and higher mortality from Voldemort. Okay. And we're talking about they've tested, when they got in, like here are their vitamin D levels, and they looked at their outcomes.
Okay. Not changing anything. It's just they're just observing that, okay, these people are here,
yes,
Voldemort, and this is what their levels are.
Yes.
Okay.
And what's interesting about that study is what they said was sufficient.
20.
Well, no, they actually were a little better. They said 30.
Okay.
But what we're going to show you later is for immune optimization, it may be higher than that. So my point was, if you look at people with even higher vitamin D levels, it might have been even a greater effect, is my point. So there was another study in October 2021. This was another systemic review and another meta-analysis. And then they looked at mortality risk from Voldemort. So this study took 7 hospital studies and compared mortality with vitamin D level. Okay, so these are 7 separate hospitals. This was really interesting what they did. So they had data and they plotted it. And when you do what's called a linear regression, it's a statistical technique where you take data. I'm not going to, because that's what people turn off the podcast immediately if we start talking about statistics. And they're very important. But linear regression, basically you can take data and then you can extrapolate it, take the slope of the line and just continue even past where your actual data was, and look at a theoretical endpoint. For instance, if we
this
are
is the plotting they've been doing constantly, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, in 3 months we're gonna
a little different. In other words, here's a way to explain this one. So if I have all the data and I have vitamin D levels, let's just say out of all the studies, I had people usually between, let's say 10 nanograms per milliliter, very low vitamin D. And let's say the top one was, I'm just making this up, just as an example.
Yeah.
Let's say the top one was in the 40s. So you have data from people from 10 to 40. With that, you look at what the mortality, how many people those people died. And you correlate the amount of deaths with vitamin D level. And on a graph, it gives you a slope. Like, okay, as I get closer to 40, mortality has gone way, way down.
Okay.
But I didn't have any data for like 50. Okay. And in their study, they didn't have anybody at those higher levels.
Yeah.
So at the highest level, I think it was still like, it was down to like 5% mortality. What they did is they took that slope and kept going with it to where it reached the 0 on the axis. And that corresponded to about 50. So it's a theoretical model that predicts that if they would have had people have gotten to 50 nanograms per milliliter,
Right.
they theoretically would have 0 mortality.
Which have you said yet what we know what the old standard? Have you said what the new standard that people that are
No, we're
Okay.
going to talk about what we're probably seeing. There hasn't been a new standard set yet, and that's the problem.
We're not letting that rabbit out of the hat yet.
No, but they haven't set an official standard.
okay.
I'm saying the data suggests it should be higher.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to talk about. I'll tell you what I would probably
Yeah.
recommend. Now, this data from this was before vaccination. Okay. So all this study was done prior to vaccinations. So they were just looking at, and their model predicted 0 mortality if you had 50 nanograms. It shows you, that potentially this is very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, again, you could rightly say, well, this is a model, okay? But it's is a pretty large data set, and it at least raises some very strong associations.
It's something to consider, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. That's how science should work. So from a ton of papers, and there's been a ton of papers describing this, that 20 nanograms per milliliter is just not adequate. Now, it's adequate for maybe preventing rickets and osteomalacia, but it's likely not adequate at all for optimizing your immune system and the other functions of vitamin
That's just
D.
like the lowest level stuff that...
Yeah, it's like what we originally used it for. You know what I'm getting right. So several authors of these studies have proposed that based on what we're seeing on observational data, that a range of 40 to 60 would probably be optimal to cover all your bases. Okay. Now, people, when you start talking about that, a lot of docs, some of my colleagues that haven't kept up to the literature still say, well, what about toxicity? You know,
I've heard that, like taking too much and
and they're like, because what about because the concern is too much calcium, basically. Since it's involved heavily in calcium regulation, they'll think you'll get too much calcium in the blood. And hypercalcemia, which just means high calcium in the blood, very high levels can cause neurological problems, can cause a lot of issues. But we've shown that between 4,000 and 10,000 IUs supplemented daily has been safe without any side effects.
Like when you say that, do you mean like it shows like literally it's the number is so large of zero side effects? Or
they haven't shown it. They haven't shown any of the toxicity supplementing those levels. And I'm gonna get into that a little more here. Too.
Are you gonna get in also when maybe you are feeling a little Voldemort-y, a little, maybe you got a little something coming on?
Yeah. No, because
bumping that up.
Those studies haven't really. Okay. That's a great question.
Or maybe not Voldemort, but something else.
Even other.
Okay.
That's a great question, and that's an important question. Even respiratory viruses in general, there hasn't been good data showing, because vitamin D takes a bit to get up to level. It takes a while to get it into, and it has a longer half-life. Those kind of studies as treatment have not been very successful.
And what I was referring to is maybe you're starting to get some sort of runny nose or something like that, and then you bump up to like 40,000 IUs just in a day. Like,
they've tried, and that hasn't been successful.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unlike vitamin C, where there's some data that suggests it can help acutely with like helping neutrophils do their job a little better.
Is that what I was thinking? Was I mixing those up?
You may have.
Bumping up. I remember
vitamin C. Actually, there is some data on that, and theoretically, what happens is neutrophils and those innate immune system cells, especially neutrophils, when they have something called an oxidative respiratory burst. It's how they kill things.
Okay.
It can help increase that. Vitamin C can.
To help just defend on that initial.
So there's a lot more data on vitamin C, which is a water-soluble vitamin, it's rapidly excreted and used, versus vitamin D in the acute phase. So there hasn't been, nor would I recommend using, like I said, this isn't treatment. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an important one.
That's the third time you said that.
Yeah, but I just want to emphasize.
To encourage you.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that point is important, that we're not talking about treatment versus.
Olivia had a question?
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to throw this out there. I'm sure you're going to address it, but like, what is the point of like diminishing returns as far as like the upper limit of how much you want?
Yep.
And then also, how long would it take from, let's say you had optimum levels in the summertime, by wintertime, let's say December, right? How long does it take for it to fall to where you're not taking enough, like you need to up?
That's a great question too. It's cumulative, and I believe I remember right, vitamin D's half-life is like 15 days. I'll have to look at it again, but I think it's longer. And so it depletes slower. And so, you'd have to kind of do some blood measurements yourself. I mean, also, are you obese? Do you have diabetes? Things like that can help deplete it faster and further. So you would have to check, get some blood levels and see, and do some experimentation and see how fast you are actually dropping. But it's slower, for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're not going to drop like
No.
30 points or something in a matter of 3 months if you're continuing the same level of supplementation?
Oh, if you're continuing the same level?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, let's say like you're taking 5,000 during the summertime,
Nope.
and then you kept through till December.
The problem-
and you didn't up it.
Yeah, but you didn't. You probably are actually going to increase your levels.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the opposite. If you didn't up it, it will go very slowly. So you're just not getting the sun exposure you're getting in the summer, right? So that level, you're right. That level may be inadequate, but it's still not going to fall
To like
appreciably.
20.
No,
Yeah,
no,
okay.
you're not going to get deficient.
You're
if
making your
taking-
floor hopefully 40
yeah,
rather than your floor is like 15,
50.
20.
yeah, for sure, for sure. But that's why I always say if you're to figure out what you need, you should probably check.
Yeah.
Now, this is an important thing. Vitamin D doesn't just work by itself. So when we're talking about side effects for vitamin D, the primary ones have to do with calcium. And that's always been the worry. So what's interesting is if you take it with vitamin K2, so K2 is really interesting. It's produced by our gut microbiota. So, and everyone's gut flora is a little different. So who knows how much K2 it's producing? It depends. But it's really interesting that K2 produces a protein that helps prevent calcium from lodging in your arterial walls. So it kind of diverts it to where it needs to go. So especially, and this is really interesting. And Carrie's going to talk about this. You want to hear someone rant? You wait till she gets on talking about calcium supplementation.
We'll have the beep bleep button ready.
For her? Yeah, you probably should. Calcium supplementation because how many times have you heard that for osteoporosis, Livia? You need to take vitamin D with calcium. You heard that?
That sounds vaguely familiar.
So women, especially postmenopausal women, they're told that all the time.
She's going to, on the drive home, she's like, does he think I'm postmenopausal?
No, I don't. That's why she's probably not heard of it. Because she's not.
I'm not thinking about osteoporosis just yet.
Right. So there's a common recommendation that is still being said to doctors that aren't keeping up with the literature. Supplemental calcium can actually cause heart problems for this very mechanism. Usually you don't have a calcium deficiency. Usually people have a vitamin D deficiency. In other words, they get enough calcium in their diet. They just don't have enough vitamin D to absorb it.
Didn't the milk industry push calcium for bones?
Of course they did. So they're just, those industries will, whatever they can do to make it seem like you're doing stuff for your health. The bottom line is you get plenty of calcium. You don't need to supplement calcium is my point. You don't need to take supplements for that for most people.
Yeah.
And it can actually cause harm. So I'd never recommend calcium supplementation. We'll talk about, Carrie's going to talk about osteoporosis. Really, it's resistance exercise. Make sure you have adequate vitamin D. But anyway, like I said, one of the people are like, oh, if you have too much vitamin D, like if you're above, 30 or whatever, you're going to start producing too much calcium. Well, not really, and especially if you take it with K, because it's not going to get into your blood. It's not going to get into the walls. K2 especially.
So like the bottle we have says vitamin D3 plus K2. And it's
great.
Yeah.
So what we found when we started looking at this, people with low bone calcium, osteoporosis, when we were looking at this, we're like, well, they have low bone calcium, but they have higher vascular calcium. So we can actually look at calcium. There's calcium scoring you can do on a imaging, where they seem to have calcium buildup in their arteries. But I'm like, well, why are they having that? But they have low bone calcium because they had low K2, and that's how we kind of figured that out.
Got it.
So when you start supplementing K2, you start getting that away from the arteries and putting it where it's supposed to go, into the bone. If that makes sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and again, I already talked about this already, what K2 actually does. Now, where do you get K2 except for a supplement? There's some, there are some food sources.
What does K2 mean?
K2 is a vitamin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we can get it naturally, like you're about to say, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, your gut microbiome will make it, but you can get it from food sources. The highest one is this fermented thing called natto. Have you ever heard of natto? It's a Japanese. It's fermented soybeans.
You think you're saying that right?
Natto. Yeah, probably not.
Okay.
But it's I've tasted it. I think it's horrific, but it's a really good source of K2. Cheese, but a lot lower. The best is Munster cheese. Not Monster, but Munster.
Okay.
Cheddar has less. Beef liver, fermented foods.
Kyle loves beef liver.
Well, he probably has good K2.
Kyle McAllister.
Yeah.
He went in, so they didn't give us. We just bought a cow.
Yeah.
And we split it with him.
Yeah.
And they didn't give all the organ meat or whatever. And he waited in line just for that delicious organ meat and
It's good for you. I actually I take the desiccated organ.
The what?
Desiccated. I'll
Does
talk
that
about
mean it's
that.
been dead for a long time?
No.
Okay, Bill.
What? Like desiccate? What does desiccated
Isn't it
mean?
like dehydrated?
Yeah, it's dry. It's
Lucky guess.
it's freeze dried. You're getting beat up today. I feel a little bad for you. Yeah, so they basically dry out, freeze dry, and they're in capsules.
What do you put in your coffee or something?
No,
Bill, you've
they're
had some you
in a
didn't
big
even
capsule. I drink a shake in the morning. I just take the capsules with it
Okay.
because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Besides,
So that's a good way to.
yeah, it has also it has a lot of good.
But
stuff.
if you're gonna do the vitamin D plus K2, do you need to do those
No.
things?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
It has A in it too. It has a lot of good stuff in organ meats. Egg yolks too. It depends on the quality. You know, if you're getting that factory farm stuff, not so much. But if you're, free range chickens from a local farmer with a kind of the bright, colorful yolks, they have some K2 in there too. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So one of the things I gotta say, since we're talking about medical stuff, is if you're on warfarin, which is a blood thinner, anticoagulant, you do not want to take supplemental K1 or K2. You can inhibit. Your people are taking anticoagulation for preventing clotting for some reason. You can mess all that up. So that's just a public service announcement.
What about quercetin? Because doesn't quercetin thin?
I was thinking you're thinking of bromelain, I think I heard.
Yeah, bromelain. No, that's not what I'm talking. Yeah, that's a good question. That's not what I'm talking about here, though. Warfarin is a specific type of anticoagulant.
Okay, it's not just okay.
It's inhibitory for that particular. Is that it?
Yeah. So what exactly for that specific medication, vitamin K will inactivate it, and not make it work.
Okay.
So I'm just putting that out there because we're talking about it, and I don't want someone on warfarin.
And it's very specific and actually has a pretty good impact on that.
Yeah,
Or not good, but
not a good
significant.
one. Significant. Yeah, and we would want to do that. So we talked about K2 is important to take with D.
We haven't gotten to how much, and
will.
I'm waiting for it.
And we'll be here in a second. Okay. I got to get through this.
All right.
So another really important one is magnesium. So magnesium is really important. Remember how in the beginning we talked about how vitamin D was made first in the skin, then goes to the liver, then goes to the kidney, all those activation steps. Magnesium is important for all those it's necessary for those activation steps. What's interesting is they've actually supplemented people with magnesium and their blood D levels went up of the active form.
That's interesting.
So magnesium and D are it's one of the things I take all the time. I take various things, but something I always take is magnesium and vitamin D because we're deficient in it. We should probably do a whole podcast on magnesium because it's super interesting and really important.
Yeah.
I think that'd be good.
And I feel like it's kind of, I don't know, you say it and I just think of like some sort of metal. You know, and I don't, like, Magneto. And I know it's in the element packs, but I don't know. I mix it up with melatonin. I don't even know what it does.
Yeah, magnesium is a in chemistry, it's a divalent cation. All that means is it's a, I know.
My bad.
It is bad.
My bad.
Yeah. It's usually complex with something, magnesium oxide, magnesium, citrate, whatever. It's an ion. It is on the periodic table of one of the transition metals, we call it. So you're right.
MA.
MG.
Oh, yeah.
MG. So, yeah.
Okay.
So, but anyway.
Yeah, at some point we should talk about that more.
That's a really good one to talk about. But anyway, that's also important with D. So that's kind of the main stuff I wanted to talk about, the background of it. But yeah, so what some of the recent research is showing is that it seems to be, the sweet spot. And what I've told my patients, everyone's individual, of course, but I think a vitamin D level between 40 and 60 is safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably about optimum to cover all our bases for to optimize immune function. Certainly well above, making sure you have enough for calcium and all that, but also, muscle regeneration.
What range do you start to potentially see the negative side effects? 100 or
yeah,
like
they've seen well over 100, and they've even done studies where I'll have to pull up this one again. They actually did a pretty large study looking at people with high levels, and I think only one person had hypercalcemia, and that level was absurd. I think it was like almost 200. So it's one of these things. It's very similar to the skin cancer sunscreen thing, where that they've taken. I mean, vitamin D is incredibly safe, but they've taken this one little theoretical thing that might happen, and they've just kind of gotten super alarmist about it. And it's nonsense, basically.
And now everyone's individual.
Yep.
But starting out supplement, you said 4,000 to 8,000 or 4,000 to 10,000 has
been shown to be safe. But
I use now is what we're talking about.
I use
4,000 and 10,000 I use.
But before you would recommend, in the Northwest, I think if everyone took 4,000 IUs, you're covering some bases that you probably need to.
Yeah.
I can't give individual recommendations. You definitely have to get the test, and then you can kind of titrate it to kind of see what is your sweet spot. Okay, and if you have other things like diabetes and obesity, you may need even more.
Okay, so a good starting point. Like I know our pills are 4,000 each,
5,000.
5,000. So we take 2 a night.
1 to 2, depending.
Yeah, and that might be perfect for you guys. I typically, as a general public health thing, I think if people were just doing 4,000, they still may be underdoing it, but at least it's gonna be better than they probably are.
4,000 every other day.
Again,
okay. Is the every other day? Is it best to just stay on it? Is there a benefit to just taking it daily rather than every other day, every couple days?
Yeah, for sure. Having a standard. Once you figure out what your dose is, and then like I'll up mine in the winter. Because I found that's what my levels were lower.
Right.
And then I'll decrease it in the summer.
So we do have people that listen in sunny environments. What about them?
Have them get tested. They may be fine.
Okay.
And it depends on your complexion too. Like, if you put, Andrew down in Arizona, he won't have supplement at all.
Right.
And he'd have to worry about being burned.
He's very pale.
Well, and what's interesting is that's an adaptation. If you look at his ancestry is Norwegian, high latitudes, the angle of the sun isn't great. They're basically vitamin D magnets is what they are.
Right.
People with lighter skin, and that's because of a adaptation to their environment. And people closer to the equator have darker skin because of the same, the same reason for that, and that's melanin production for that. And so that's why people with lighter skin are much better adapted to lower sunlight areas.
Well, and Bill too, my parents, they live in Arizona, and they tell me that their winter is during the summertime and people just don't go outside. So they may end up actually having lower vitamin D levels.
That
during
is
summer.
That's a great point, because that's true, because it's so hot.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. And so, again, depending on your lifestyle and where you are, it's still just good to check your levels, because like you may not need any.
Right.
You may be in a sweet spot already. I think they did a study with like Israeli lifeguards, and some of them had like 80 and 90. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did have a question though.
Yeah.
So you keep saying that people who have diabetes or obese need to supplement potentially with more vitamin D. What is it about those particular, diabetes or being overweight or is causing that?
Inflammation is interrupting it.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember obesity, and we're going to talk about that as well if you guys are interested in talking about how obesity is actually inflammatory and what happens to fat cells at a certain point where, it's the bottom line that drives most of these chronic diseases is an inflammatory process, a low level one. And so it's a chicken or the egg thing. Okay. Is that causing low vitamin D, or are they more obese and diabetic because they is that a factor, right?
Right.
I don't think that's been sussed out completely, but it definitely, what we found, there has been some studies by optimizing a diabetic's vitamin D definitely helps their insulin sensitivity and blood sugar control, for sure.
Is what was I gonna say? So I lost it.
No, you're fine.
Hey, go.
And I think if you guys can, go
I
ahead.
Remembered. Okay, so if it's inflammation that's causing that depletion, is it because the inflammation has to do with the immune response going on, and so it's running through vitamin D quicker?
Yeah, again, I think that could be. It could be also inhibiting the conversion.
Okay.
There's many factors involved. That's that whole chicken or the egg thing. But you're certainly correct. It could be that as well.
Okay.
Liv, can you bring up the questions from last episode?
Yeah, I can see if I can find them.
Yeah, because there was 2 that we didn't actually answer.
Okay.
That I think.
Yeah, and while she's
good.
doing that, I can't remember what the app is, but there's a really kind of a cool app that you just plug in where you live, and basically your kind of describe your complexion, and I think they can give you like you should be out in the sun for this many minutes. And it tracks where you are in the season.
Oh yeah, I looked that up.
Did you?
Yeah, it's called D Minder.
Yeah, cool. So then, if you're trying to get it from the sun, you can kind of get, hey, what would be the optimum dose of sunlight for you?
And when you say optimum, is it going off the old standard, or is it?
Yeah, it's a good question too.
Yeah, okay.
But as far as without burning, but also trying to maximize vitamin D production, and depending on your latitude, time of day, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to look more into the app, but I think some of those things are kind of interesting. Yeah.
So in the vitamin D, just to go over, we know it's going to help with recovery. It's going to help with your immune system and just being preventative.
Yeah.
Right. Energy levels.
Yep.
It's going to help with that.
The mitochondria thing we talked about. Yep.
Yeah.
Sleep?
Yeah. I haven't looked at any recent articles on that, but I think it certainly could help regulate that as well. Because remember, all that has to do sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah,
it's related to the immune system.
Right.
I think you can make a really good case for that too.
So I think we had 2 questions that we wanted to.
So I'm going to this completely cold here.
You saw them last week.
Oh, okay.
They're leftover actually from last week.
There's 3, but 2 of them probably aren't going to take too long. So do you want me to do?
Oh yeah, all 3 is fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first one is, for a white belt, what is the best bang for your buck drill for Someone who has a small stress cup on off days.
A white belt is just looking for like a solo drill, I would assume.
Yeah, I'm assuming.
That
it's not too taxing, I'm understanding from this question.
Yeah, that's what I would assume is solo drill, and we could probably just, in case they're talking about, maybe they have a partner that they can do something with, or they're going to come to class, they're not going to spar.
Just want to drill.
But they want to get some work in.
That's a good approach.
I would say for a solo drill is look up Andre Goval. I think it's called like Gymnastica or something.
Gymnastica Natural.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Specifically Andre Goval video. And there's a couple of them, but there's one that I really like, and it's older. It's probably from 2008 or something like that, 2005. And what it's doing is he's just doing jiu-jitsu movements across his like living room or mat space or whatever you have. And it's a lot of the warm-up movements, but you're chaining them all together. So instead of doing shrimps like down across your living room or down the mat.
I've seen that.
Yeah, you do a shrimp, which goes into an inversion, into a monkey roll, into a 90-90 position, swing around on you. Like everything becomes very fluid, and what you're doing is you're getting used to a lot of these core movements that we do during rolling, stretching it actively in the moment. You can get your heart rate up a little bit just to do it. But it's what I do as like my own warm up when I'm cold. Like I don't, and maybe you can kind of answer this. I feel gooder when before class if I'm moving around as a warm up. I'm not saying like running because I hate that, but I'm like when we do our stretching as a group, butterfly stretch, let's say. I personally like just holding it static. I don't feel as good as if I like kind of oscillate a little bit.
Right.
And instead of just leaning forward in a butterfly stretch, that's where your feet are kind of touching like this.
The frog stretch or
no, butterfly.
Okay.
Like, or a frog stretch, right? That's another one. But I'll get into the range and then I'll kind of explore all these kind of different angles almost a little bit. And I do that with basically every stretch, like Cossack squat.
You probably notice I do the same thing. I'm always moving.
Yeah.
I think that's a better way to do it anyway, because you're hitting all those different angles and what we call workspace is what the FRS calls it, where you're looking at, because you don't just work in one plane. You're getting all these different lines of force and So I agree with you, and I think it's better for the nervous system.
I think that moving what was it, Gymnastica?
Yeah, Gymnastica Natural.
That kind of, as I'm doing these little, and it's literally like you're painting a picture, like there's no structure to it. But as I do it, my inversion's deeper a minute in than it is.
That's right.
In the beginning, you do a push up to a bear crawl and jump forward, like frog stretch, back roll, like you do all these things, and you're getting deeper in the movements as you go.
I think that is a great suggestion, honestly, overall for what they're talking about. It's kind of getting the nervous system, neuromuscular system, all kind of warmed up and primed. Yeah. And it's not super taxing.
Yeah. Especially for a solo drill, and you don't need much space.
Well, jiu-jitsu is movement, and the better you are at movement, the better things are going to be. You're going to be able to upload techniques better instead of just it's like I want to do this drill. Yeah. I think that's a great answer. I wouldn't have anything better to add.
If something else you can do is wrestlers are really good at this, but there's something in boxing, shadow boxing, right? Or any striking art, really. That's legit. Shadow boxing, and that's you're in front of a mirror. Or you don't have to be in front of a mirror, but and you're gonna kind of just throw your punches and stuff like that. Wrestlers do something very similar in the standing position. They're in a good wrestling position, right? Bent over. And you can essentially do this with jiu-jitsu, and that's practice your stand-up in a shadow boxing kind of sense. Get used to moving around, arm drags and stuff like that, pulling off your heads, practice your like a slide by movement. The stuff that I mean, you're a white belt, so you're not going to have a ton of arsenal that you're going through, but you can still at least practice in getting into your position. Know that you're going to be defending against collar grips, so your hands are in good spots, and like I said, practice. Imagine you're going for a grip, right? You're
I like that.
Multiple chain. So it's just another kind of active thing that you can do.
I like that as well. I think your first one, talking about white belts is, learning to move is.
Don't be so rigid.
Yeah. And really kind of, I hate to use the word, but.
What about a partner? If they're talking about, well, I'm not going to spar today. What bang for your buck? I mean, that's going to be a difficult.
You got to have the right partner.
Yeah.
You don't want to go, hey, bro, let's flow roll, and then you get, which I don't like that word anyway. I think I don't know what that is.
It's been abused a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Every time I see it, it's not.
Well, there's in my opinion, you want to hear a rant. In my opinion, there's different kinds of flow rolling. And
Andrew loves flow rolling.
No, he does not.
He's too big on it, if I could be bold. He's a little too much of a proponent. But I have gotten benefit from certain kinds of flow rolling.
Yeah.
But there has to be a mutual understanding. And there will be an episode that you can sit off to the side in the corner with Andrew. Just sit on each other's lap. And then I'll have someone in here and we'll talk about it.
That sounds amazing.
But with a partner, I mean...
Yeah.
It's going to be kind of what I would say, whatever you are zeroing in on. Number one, if you're a white belt, zero in on something.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be what you're doing in class. I actually would say do something that's not being done in class. Find something that is a technique that you're working on, that you want to work on. Watch a YouTube video. Ask an upper belt. And like, what can I work on this? And break that drill down to where maybe the drill is 5 steps to the whole move. Break it down and do the first step.
Yep.
Just do that first step 20, 30 times. Then do the first step and the second step 20, 30 times. First, second, third step 20, 30 times. So now you've done the first step, 90 times.
I think that's a great suggestion. Something I might add is I've seen a tendency, especially kind of depending on who you are, kind of the young athletic white belt come in and they don't play guard until they're a blue belt. So I think, focusing on some guard retention drills that you could do, developing that guard and the movements associated with doing that, like you talked about earlier, I think would be much better.
Keep your dang knees to your chest.
Yes, much better. Really good. So all those are good suggestions. I like it.
Anything, Liv? Do you have anything to add on those?
I agree with everything you said.
That's a good lady right there. Next.
Okay. Is there a basic set of jiu-jitsu gear I should start with? Do I need a jiu-jitsu bag?
Okay. Do you need... I would say no.
No.
Is it convenient? Yes. I didn't get a jiu-jitsu bag till like purple belt, I'd say. Now that I have one, it's quite nice.
Yeah.
I actually have. If you're in the financial position to get one, I would say do it.
Yep.
Because then you stock up that bag with the essentials, which... I mean, I'll say what's in ours, and there's finger tape, which is like the thinner, a little bit thinner, and then there's the thicker 1 inch wide tape. I like to have both because one you can use on fingers or small joints, and then the other one I use on my toenail, which I've been using for 2 years, or if you need to tape like an ankle or a wrist. I have my mouth guards in there, which I would recommend a Sisu, SISU mouth guard.
I concur.
Mm.
Before I got braces, I can't use it now, but
right.
But I think that's the best brand personally.
Yeah.
So they're excellent.
Noticeably easier to breathe in, and they have a wrestling one that's made for grappling.
Yep.
What else? I have element packets in there. With what else do we have in our bag?
I have like a post-workout orange, something that I can do afterwards. Like I'll have a little bit so I can get a little bit of carbohydrate afterwards on the drive home.
Yeah.
Any stuff like that is nice to kind of consolidate everything. So that way you're also not leaving stuff around. I think the bag's a great idea. Also, probably have just 2 gis to start with.
Oh, as being an essential, yeah. Your life will be easier.
Yep.
If you are not just using 1 gi,
right?
And you won't run in. You will run into this, but this makes it so you won't. I'm going to train tonight. Oh, I just washed my gi yesterday, or I just trained yesterday. I'm hang drying it. It's not dry enough. You're embarrassed to go to the gym with a semi-wet gi. It's not wet dripping or anything, but it's still like the armpit area because that's where it folds over. Some air, the collar maybe is still damp, and then you don't go train.
Didn't you rip the butt out of a gi or something? Did you rip something a couple of years ago? There's something, or it wasn't the butt. It was a big leg rip in your pants or something.
I don't think it was me.
Wasn't it you?
Rashawn. I think Rashawn
maybe
tore like 2 pairs of pants.
Okay. But it's nice to have a backup.
Yeah, for sure. That I did tear a gi actually a week and a half ago or a week ago.
I don't know why I had that in my mind.
Really torn. Was it the same gi, the tatami?
No, I've
two gis.
I lost 2 gis in the last probably 3 months. And they're 2 of my favorite gis. My Moya, my super ultra light tatami.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's, so you can also accidentally tear a gi. Do you bring 2 gis?
No, but if you tear one,
yeah,
it's nice that way you're not like, oh crap, I got to order another one. Or
yeah,
what if, they at the academy, they don't have your size and you're like, oh, I have a backup.
Right.
So I don't have to.
So being able to cycle them is really nice. And then also, you're not, I actually ordered a gi and I think it's 13 days out or something like that.
Yeah. The cycling back, a lot of people don't roll with a mouth guard. I think that's crazy.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah. And even, we had a guy blow his front tooth out just a couple weeks ago or a month ago. And that was the reminder because you get lazy. You start rolling like, oh, I got to go get it. I'll get it later. And then you don't get it.
Right. Yeah. And, so I think that's a crucial one. Yeah. Otherwise, as far as necessities, a rash guard.
Those are, and before rash guards are a little bit more expensive than just athletic wear. So I would just go. What I did before was I went to Dick's Sporting Good or something like that, and I just got a couple of the cheap Under Armour,
like the compression
shirts, which end up being like $15.
Yep.
And I got a couple of those, and later on would get some rash guards, which end up being like $40. And there's, in my opinion, no noticeable difference.
Yeah, not
some
much.
Look maybe cooler, or there's a brand you like, you want to support, or something like that.
There's probably most of the grappling rash guards are a little more less. What am I trying to say? A little more sturdy.
Yeah.
And
they're made so like most brands, they won't ride up your back.
Yeah,
which is pretty annoying.
That's super annoying. But
athletic undies. That's a must. If you show up without underwear on,
I was gonna say, I've seen it.
Yeah,
it's not pretty.
You're a boner biter is what you are. And
don't do that. Just don't. Don't. We'll have to pull you aside.
Yeah, and if you wear like regular underoos, it's not good for you, and it's not good for someone else.
Kind of on the same subject, please wash your gi after every.
I was going to say, let's touch on maybe some hygiene issues like clip your nails.
Nail clipping, Definitely wash your gi. Yeah, fingernails and toenails. I've been slashed by some toenails.
Oh yeah. Those are the ones that do the more cutting, I think, than fingernails.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I've been laid open with a toenail before. Yeah, they can be pretty.
It was Bill, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Bill. Yeah.
Washing your gi. Yeah.
Washing your gi and
and I would say quickly, immediately.
Yes.
Because I have lost to the dirty gi gods. I think 2 gis, because what happens is I do class and I just let it sit in that jiu-jitsu bag for, you just forget about it. So then it's the next morning. Okay, I'll wash it out. Well, you do that so many times that the bacteria, you're not getting it out.
Here's a good tip for that. Public service announcement.
Okay.
I actually use Odoban.
Heard of this.
You can get like gallon jugs of it. It works awesome. And let me tell you, as a person that sweats as much as I do,
And you stink.
I know.
If you don't wear a lot of stuff.
You're saying me in general?
Like your body.
You're saying that me specifically?
You.
Thank you for. I try to be very clean. Thanks. So
you are very clean.
Yeah.
You are very
Chris
clean.
has never stunk to me.
I know. I'm just giving him crap.
Okay, well,
thank you, Olivia.
you're welcome.
Let me milk it a little bit. You don't. You just sweat like a pig.
Oh my gosh, it's terrible. But if I didn't, my point was, before I discovered this Odoban trick, I tried the vinegar, I tried all that stuff. Ugh, it didn't really work well. But I started using this stuff, and it rescued a couple of my ones that were, gonna get thrown away.
Right. And what happens is your gi smells like cat piss. Not yours, but when you allow this to happen and you don't wash it quickly enough, what happens is there's an underlying cat piss smell that only comes out once you start sweating. So you'll be like, this gi's all right. And then, situations start. Now you're sparring. You got some sweat on it. It starts releasing the Kraken on the person that you're grappling with. And now they think you're cat piss guy.
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy.
You don't want to be cat piss guy.
Or girl.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
We're inclusive here. Please.
So
come on.
And then you smell it and you think it's the other person. But you don't realize
it's you.
It's you, dude.
And everyone's talking about you.
Everyone's like, that MFer is stinky.
Yeah.
And
you don't want to be the stinky person.
You just don't want to do it. So try to wash your stuff as quickly as you can.
But the Odoban was kind of a game changer.
And I know you see a bunch of videos, dudes in Brazil, they put their gis out in the sun while they lay them out and then they train later on that day. That's
doesn't work.
And let's be honest, you're not doing that.
Well,
you're putting it in a bag and it sits in your trunk for 3 days.
But even that, they're all doing it. They all
cat pee.
Have the thing. So I'm not saying they, but if that was the case, if
I
everyone's
you
doing
people.
Oh man, we're gonna get canceled. We were doing so well with the Voldemort thing and all that. All of a sudden, we're gonna get canceled.
Hello,
great job.
You got another question?
Oh,
thank you. Please ask one.
Please, as fast as possible.
So this person's asking, how can I give back to my jiu-jitsu gym? When I have time, I try to help clean the mats and floors. Is there anything else that one can do to demonstrate their appreciation?
I think that's a nice thing to do. Just helping out, cleaning up, and just you don't have to be a sycophant.
I think that's actually helping clean the mats is one of the, especially as someone that has started teaching regularly.
Yeah. And someone that doesn't clean mats?
Oh. Okay.
No, but in general, I don't see you pushing that little thing a lot.
This man should be strucken down. Are you agreeing with him?
No, I agree with you.
Okay.
Oh.
You do clean?
Yeah.
The mats? Okay.
You dirtbag.
Well, it's been a little bit for the evening ones, but we were doing
I just
it
did
like
last
for
week.
a year straight. It was
Okay.
like almost every night.
Yeah.
And then I had to yell at Bill because I was like, okay, we can't keep coming home at 9:00 at night.
Okay.
So lecture her.
No, I take that back.
Thank you. So I don't take back the dirtbag comment. So not you, it means a lot to make that process faster, especially at a gym. Like our gym, class ends, normal class.
Yeah.
And then it's open mat. And Andrew doesn't put in something where, okay, we have a half an hour rolling and then
Nope.
we're gone.
That's right.
It's kind of, he's leaving it open so people can get as much work as possible.
Yep.
Especially in that scenario, because, he's not one to like just kick people out.
And he's not one to ask people to do stuff for
And
him
he
either.
never asks anybody.
And
to
he'll do it himself. And so it's really,
So if you have a gym like that, when you do just jump on it and help in that scenario, that it does mean quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have someone that's like, okay, in 30 minutes we're going to start packing up, even in that scenario, it just takes a little bit off. That does mean a lot.
Also, I think just being kind and welcoming to new people.
Mm-hmm. Helping out in that respect.
And not being, well, not necessarily not teaching or anything,
No.
but as far as just being pleasant to people and welcoming new people, because it's a little intimidating. And, I hate those kind of cliquey places where,
Sure.
where people either like, oh, I can, they don't feel approachable and all that. I think that's just
If you see a new person, you just, whether they're a colored belt or not, you just go up to them and say, hey, how's it going, man?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
visiting? Oh, starting? Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like take them out to dinner in that moment, but you can at least just, say what's up to them.
I think that helps the academy atmosphere out, the whole culture.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's helpful.
But I think, the cleaning thing is kind of the easiest and most beneficial thing that you can really do.
I think that's a great question.
And maybe if there's like a Google review or something like that that helps, or on Facebook, posting something and tagging the gym and saying like, this has been beneficial for me, if you're a social media person. I think that could be good too.
I like it.
Hold a sign
we're
out.
gonna be cleaning tonight, Bill.
Probably.
You'll get the side eye from me if you don't.
When was the last time you cleaned?
Last time I was in there.
Oh, that's why you lined this up. Because before that, it was 6 months.
Are you really gonna? You see me pushing that thing all the time. I'm either squirting or pushing.
Hit the music, honey.
Let's end it right there.
Hit the music.
I think that's a T-shirt.
You are a dirty sailor.